Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Comics as Care, using comics as mental health resources. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, and we are live from fourth space. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. We're running today's event as a live-streamed Zoom meeting, so we welcome everyone because, especially during the first activity part, just to turn on your cameras if you'd like. Comments and questions are good in the chat, and we'll make sure we get those into the room. And for those of you in the space, just let us know if you want to, if you have any comments or questions, and we'll get a microphone over to you. Okay. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Amy Mazowita, Concordia Public Scholar and PhD candidate in the Department of Communication Studies. Amy, welcome in.
Okay, thank you, Doug, and thank you so much to everyone here at Fourth Space for hosting us today. Thanks to everyone for joining us in person and to everybody on the Zoom or on YouTube as well. As Doug mentioned, my name is Amy, and I'm a Concordia Public Scholar and a PhD candidate in Communication Studies. My research is focused on social media-based comics and how they're being used as alternative methods of self and community-based care. So very much in line with what we will be talking about and working on today. Before I introduce our guests that we have with us, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We're going to be talking about mental health experiences, so I just want to remind everyone that it's meant to be a very safe space here. Be very gentle with yourself and others, be respectful of everyone's boundaries. We don't want you to feel pressured to share anything you're uncomfortable with, but, oh, I just lost my, sorry, computer did something a little weird there. I just want everyone to have a great time and to also not feel pressure to talk about anything that they are uncomfortable with. We do have a break scheduled around the midpoint today, but if at any point you need to step out and take a few minutes, please feel free to do so and just rejoin us whenever you are ready. I also want to draw attention to the printouts that we have around the table and also on the chairs. We're also sharing that on the screen right now on Zoom and YouTube, and the links will be put in the chat as well. This just has some different links to some mental health resources in Quebec, some different hashtags and accounts that are really interesting you may want to follow after today's workshop, and then a link to the Graphic Medicine website, which has a lot of great comics scholarship and comics related to health, illness, and disability if you're interested in checking any of that out after today. So I always kind of like to know what the game plan is for an event, so just to give a bit of an outline of how things are going to go. In a few minutes, I'm going to hand things over to our workshop leader, Sandra. She's going to run us through a presentation and workshop for about an hour or so. After that, we'll take a little bit of a break where we can kind of get up, refill coffee, go to the bathroom, start reflecting, and then we'll come back together and get into the discussion and hear from our other guests and then open up the floor. I also wanted to say if everyone would like, please feel free to fill in the spots on the table for the workshop portion, but if you're happy just to sit and watch, that's totally fine as well. Yeah, so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests here today. I'd like to first introduce Ariella Friedman. Ariella is a professor at the Liberal Arts College at Concordia University in Montreal. She works on comics and graphic novels in relation to representations of pain. Her work also focuses on modernist literature, literatures of migration, and representations of trauma. She is the author of Death, Men, and Modernism, which was published by Routledge, and numerous articles, book chapters, and reviews, as well as 3 novels. Next, we have Heather McLaughlin, who's sitting across from me. Heather is an assistant professor in the Creative Arts Therapies Department at Concordia University, where she is the option coordinator for the art therapy program. Heather founded and now directs the Concordia Arts and Health Center. She is an art therapist, couple and family therapist, psychotherapist, and clinical supervisor. Heather has a BFA from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, a master's in art therapy from Concordia, and a postmaster's certificate in marriage and family therapy from the Argyle Institute. And of course, we have our workshop leader today, Sandra Dumais. Sandra makes books, paintings, and comics in Montreal, Quebec. When she is not reading, drawing, or painting, you can find her and her family, including their dog Indy, exploring Montreal's many parks and ice cream shops. And you can also find more on Sandra's work at her website, www.sandradumais.com. I also want to take a quick minute to acknowledge and thank Sandra's friend Julie, who is here today as well. She's a bit of a last-minute addition to the program, but she's going to be in conversation with Sandra a little bit once we get into the presentation and the workshop. So that is it for me for now. I'm now going to hand the floor over to Sandra and let her take it from here.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So, yeah. Expert or a comic expert. Oh, hello, sorry. Or a mute expert. But I have started making comics pretty regularly, talking about my mental health and mental health of those around me and what it's like to be raising young kids and in a pandemic and all that stuff. So before I get into my presentation, I'm just going to share a comic that I made a couple weeks ago. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, yeah, maybe I'll just let you like go through the slides each. You're sharing your entire desk. Can I change the page? Can change it? So I'm sharing this comic first because I had like a pretty big realization after making it. I made it maybe a few days after he died. I started drawing it. And when I first learned that he died, his wife texted me, and I was at the library working, and like I was like, this is sad, I'm sad. And I told some people, she asked me to let our friends know. And then I just kept thinking about it and being like, that's really weird. I can't believe he's dead. So weird. And then I made the comic over a couple of days, and after I made it, I cried and was like, oh my God, I can't believe he died. And so I realized that something that I'm kind of bad at sometimes is processing feelings. This is what my therapist said. But I realized that when I take a moment to actually spend time thinking about the experience, and I guess for me drawing or maybe writing or journaling, something can sink in, and then I can kind of move past it and accept it. And I've been doing this for so long. I've been doing this before I even made comics, before I even really knew how to draw, which not that I'm a great drawer now, but there was a time when I didn't really know how to draw very well. So the reason I've been, I could talk about comics forever and share comics forever, but I took a bunch of my work and put it into categories of like why I make comics. What is the purpose? Why am I so driven to constantly make these little stories and try to make them funny when sometimes they're really brutal, or and one of the main reasons is I realize is like making light of something. So I've had pretty big anxiety issues. I've had like panic disorder forever. and it's something I've worked, with my whole life. And so during the pandemic, I started thinking about this idea of how funny it would be if I gave a body to this emotion and this thing that kind of follows me around. And I always have nightmares, and I'm always kind of creeped out, and I can get a feeling of doom really easily. But I sort of like the idea of thinking about it as something funny. This kind of helps me accept it and kind of deal with it. So I started drawing this comic with a beast that's kind of cute, but also kind of creepy and gross. And I give him bad breath. He stands really close and like sheds on me. And so I started making this comic called Beast, which then turned into a larger project that I'm working on, which is like giving me so much more anxiety than it's even worth. That's a whole other slideshow. COVID, when COVID, like at the very beginning, the big lockdown, the big apocalyptic moment in March of 2020, I started really kind of freaking out. Our kids were home. It's like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? The world is over. And that's when I really started making a habit of drawing a comic every single day. I think it was my husband's, he said, you should draw something every night. I think I was verbally working through my anxiety. It was probably really annoying. So I started doing comics about COVID, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about that later with Julie, who like jumped in and became my COVID bud. And yeah, I like making light of things that I think afflict so many people, like night worries, which are so ridiculous how fast I can go really somewhere so dark while I'm trying to get to sleep. I've been a bad sleeper my whole life. This is the comic I made just a little while ago about the things I think of when I'm in bed. I'll definitely mull over something horrible I did to somebody when I was young, like to Robin Russell when I told her I think she should dress more adult. Made her cry. We were in the library. And, or I think a lot about like the day that my dog dies and what I'm gonna do. Like how I'm gonna handle it. I put 2037 thinking like she's gonna live to 30 or 20 or whatever. And then if I'm really lucky, I can just keep worrying and get really, really dark. Sometimes I wonder like if I'm bringing on a haunting because I love watching ghost shows and thinking about ghosts. And sometimes I'm like, I hope I see a ghost. And then I get really worried. So while in the moment these feelings are really unpleasant, there's always a part of me that's like, this would make a really funny comic. Another reason I make comics, and this is something that makes me feel really good and really happy, is to celebrate the community, people around me, things I love, weird things that make me happy. I do a lot of comics about my dog. I find my dog is a really easy one because there's no complicated feelings. It's not like my family or my kids who are teenagers. And this is like a total pick-me-up is to make a comic about my dog. And then I also do comics about dogs and use it as like a fundraising platform for the refuge, the like shelter that where we got her. So they're in India. And sometimes I'll just make a comic and then I'll send it to them and they'll do something for fundraising. So this is like a good pick-me-up. I basically constantly draw my dog, I think. And another community comic I did was I was going to draw 100 dogs that I love in and around my neighborhood that I cross. And I wanted to like stop the people and ask them, tell me about your dog. How'd you guys, meet? What's it like being this dog's, human? And people really, really love to talk about their dogs, obviously. And I would take a picture and then I would draw it and I would send it to them. And I know so many people in my neighborhood now and their dogs, and I get like messages from people about their dogs, and it's such a fun and like innocent way to connect with your community. Approaching strangers with this really benign and easy favor to ask about their animal. I also would go to Maxi sometimes and draw people which I also love. Like I love going to the grocery store and looking at people. And then there's this thing, I think it's Wendy McNeil. No, is that her name? The artist, the comic artist. I think her name is Wendy McNeil. She says gives us TED Talks about like how once you draw something, you really have an affection for it and you kind of fall in love with it. And I like using this, I like remembering this when I look around at people and how weird we all are. And I think this is when I first got Procreate and I was trying out different brushes and stuff. So that was the project I gave myself. And it made me feel happy. Every day I would go to Maxi down the street and it would make me so happy. Maybe growth, personal growth, or whatever we want to call that. I'm like working on certain things, trying to get better with boundaries and things like that. And while like talking about some of this stuff can kind of feel sort of cheesy sometimes to me, or kind of like my teenagers would say cringy, I find if I make a comic about it, it's much easier to talk about and to express. And I guess I'm always trying to like make a joke out of things, but it's a way of talking about mental health and how you're doing, and all that stuff. Yeah. I often like right before I leave the house, I'll have a moment where I can't leave the house, and then I like lay down, and then I kind of try to not to hate myself. But I was telling this to someone, and they said, "Oh, this is like a thing people do to ground. Like this is really good. People on the spectrum do that." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Like maybe this is a cool thing I'm doing for my mind, laying on my floor." Okay, so COVID and the staying in. I guess diaries is when. So I think on day one, like that first day in March when everything shut, I think it was Friday the 13th for us, like people with kids in school. I made a comic and posted it, and then I decided maybe I'm going to do this every day. And that's how Julie and I became buddies. Or I think we knew each other before, but this is when Julie jumped in pretty quickly, and then you named it and came up with a hashtag and organized it properly. And so we started drawing out our day every day, and it was so fun because a couple of people jumped in, and I saw Matali is joining us today, and I know she jumped in a couple times to do a diary, and we kept it in square format and kind of an unstructured mess of what was happening that day. And I think I did 100 days. How many days did you do, Julie?
I did every day for 100 days, and then once a week for the whole year.
Okay, yeah. And then it was called Good Julie?
Now I have one called Good Julie.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay.
So, yeah, Julie and I started kind of connecting about it and checking out each other's comics and making comments and sharing other people's. And I feel like that at that point, it really became kind of a community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually just the feeling of connecting with other people who were also recording the wildness around them.
Yeah.
And also from people who were reading them, which I didn't find out until after I had stopped, people saying, "Oh, I'm really going to miss it. It really helped us feel like this craziness was kind of normal, like grounding, because, all over the place, people could see. I'm from British Columbia originally, so people from BC were like, "Oh, yeah, it's crazy in Quebec, too. I can see that." So, yeah.
Yeah, it was a way of, I like definitely felt like it got me out of spiraling. And
Structure, yeah.
Yeah,
Other
structure. And
yeah.
I don't know if this happened to you, but throughout the day, like something really crazy would happen, and my first thing would be like, "I'm going to put it in the comments," instead of being like, "Oh my God, that's terrible."
Did you get to a point where you had to ask your family if it was okay to? I'm like,
I don't
would
ask.
say to my kids, "Okay, this is going in the comic."
I know they're gonna say
watch
no.
your mouth.
I always I notice if I make someone look particularly grouchy for too long, I'll like throw them a bone and like make them look great in one. Like I often put my little guy losing his mind, and then I'll put a really sweet one.
Yeah.
So this was I think how Amy and I connected. By posting this, I really I had such an intro into like the community of comic making and how awesome it is. And then also how you can kind of make a comic out of anything. Like I was literally putting my diary on Instagram so embarrassing sometimes, but people loved it and were like, oh yeah, this happened to me too. And I started putting the people I would cross in like the alley while I was walking the dog. I would take a picture of them and ask them if I could put them in my comic, and then I would email it to them. And then so now even still when I see them, if I'm walking down the street and I see them, we have a little chat. So it was a fun way to build a community while we weren't seeing anybody really. Yeah. Oh, so this is all drawn in Procreate on my iPad. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to remind everyone that those audience members that are joining us via Zoom cannot hear what's going on unless we speak into the mic. We're happy to run a mic to you.
Okay.
I've placed one on the table there. I just want to remind, just for those on Zoom, just so they can hear and participate and know what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, so Lacey just asked what we're drawing in. I was drawing in Procreate, so were you, Julie? Procreate on the iPad. And I was spending, I don't know, maybe an hour on them, usually in front of the TV. While my kids and my family was watching TV, I would draw. I also started like integrating some stuff that I was working on. I really love reading about different kinds of therapies and mental health. And I used cognitive behavioral therapy way back when I started working on dealing with panic attacks. And so I sort of fell in love with the whole idea of, I really love the both and thinking, where you can hold two opposing truths at the same time. And so I would keep that in mind during the lockdown when things would feel really kind of dark. I'd be like, oh, it's also really sweet being at home and locked up in an apartment with your family. Like, it can be fun. And then there was the part where we homeschooled. So when kids did go back to school, we chose to keep ours home and we homeschooled, which was a pretty loose term for semi-educating our children. Yeah, it was pretty busy at times, but then I would make really funny comics also about homeschooling and what we did or didn't do that day, and trying to see all of the tiny efforts we had as a potential lesson. So I also use comics. Sometimes I make comics that aren't funny, and that can. I'm working on like a longer form comic right now about the years where my dad was living. He was experiencing homelessness, and I went to see him in Toronto after not seeing him for a while. So I made a comic about breakfast. Can I switch? Can I go next page? Yeah, so this is like a way, definitely I can recognize that when I'm doing something like this, I'm working through something and being like, okay, how can I make a good ending to this like horrible story? And I really do believe that there's usually kind of a good thing in most of the stories around us. And I don't know why these make me feel better, but they do. Another thing I make comics about is like remembering a period or trying to capture something that maybe is like an era. So I made this on just like a piece of scrap paper with pencil when I was I think I was having a bit of a breakdown. I had a new baby, I had a toddler, and they were home with me. And as probably a lot of you know, it's kind of a wild time. I had no experience with kids when I had kids. I'd never even like changed a diaper or anything. So I was pretty shell-shocked, and it was really fun. It was a really awesome time of my life, but I made this comic one night being like, oh my God, what is happening? What have we done? So yeah, dark stuff, funny stuff, light stuff. I used to have to sleep with my son every Christmas Eve, which was really weird because I was supposed to be like wrapping the Santa gifts. So it was kind of it was a bit of a pain. But then I would remember how terrified of Santa I was. Oh my God, I was so scared of Santa. I would cry, and my brother would let me like sleep on a sliver of his bed if I didn't touch him, or sometimes he'd let me sleep on the floor. But I was always terrified of Santa. So sometimes I like making comics about, parenthood and remembering these funny things. This was like one of the first things I made that was sort of in this style of kind of, I do a lot of maps. And this was one of the first ones I did. I had an insomnia. I was traveling and I had insomnia one night. So I was like, I wonder if I could picture, I bet I could remember every house of my paper route, because I have a really long memory. And I used to deliver the Toronto Sun in Brampton. And I was such a good paper deliverer. And I had the ticket book. I don't know if any of you delivered papers if you're 100 years old. Yeah, so I was like, okay, I remember the bad payers, I remember the big tippers, and then I would deliver with my dog, who, we didn't have to put them on a leash back then. So she would just run around the neighborhood pooping where she wants. There was no pickup back then. It was wild, wild days. So it was kind of a story about my childhood growing up in this neighborhood in Brampton. It's like an immigrant neighborhood, little townhouses, and really rough. I got beat up by Diana Preston. She had a crush on this guy, and he came to my house because he was my brother's best friend's brother. Anyway, I Googled her. She looks really nice. She has a vegan restaurant now, so I think it worked out. But I really like telling stories in this way where, it sort of tells the story of an era. And yeah, it's kind of a comic, I guess. So I also work a lot with kids. I work a ton with kids, and I love it. It's my favorite. I do a couple of workshops with kids, and one is called, can't remember what it's called, but I think it's called My Good Days. So what we do is we make a 2 or 3 panel comic on something that happened that day that was meh, and then the transition period of it, and then how something good happened from it, or something like that. So I thought that it was really awesome because the first person did not want to make a comic. She was like, I can't draw, I hate doing comics, I don't read comics, I can't draw, I'm so bored, I hate school. And then she drew this genius 3-panel comic, which is so awesome. It's knocked over the mug too. So cool. And then the second one was really cute because it was a kid who got up super early, got ready for school, and sat there and waited, and no one was up yet. And then she realized it was Sunday. And these are little kids. These are grade 4. And then the third one, I love this because this kid was like, oh, I got wet in the rain. I got wet on the way to school. Then it was storming all day, and I walked home, and it was rainy. But then I had a shower, which is basically the same thing. Oh my God, that's the best story ever. The next one's cut off, actually. I don't know why. I also do this workshop called Making Faces. I haven't counted, but I think I've worked with over 4,000 or 5,000 kids doing this workshop. I've done it online with 1,500 kids at once. I just did it with 400 kids this week. And it's really, really awesome where we learn how to look at a human face and draw it making different emotions. And we make the face, and then we look at each other. And then we look at all the lines. They love looking at my face. I have so many lines on my face. And then we draw what a face really looks like. And I've done this with kids who are 4 years old. I've done it with 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and it always looks really cool. I like the little guys. They do some amazing work. And I try to just make them see how a face isn't really just what we're used to, the emoji. And then when they're really little, I bring these big stickers and I get them to draw what they're feeling, a couple feelings, and they stick it on their shirt. And again, back to that idea of like looking at something and developing affection for it is like, I feel when you look around at people's faces and take a minute to draw them and look at like how their nose is and what the shape of their face is and what their eyebrows look like, I feel like we could develop this like wider empathy for the people around us and the people in our class and like different kinds of hair and skin, and then we experiment with like layering pencil crayons to see what kinds of skin colors we can get. And yeah, I think, I don't know if it connects really to mental health, but I think that kids, they're so good and they're so ready to draw feelings and be vulnerable when they're drawing that I really love this workshop, and I love seeing how much they love it and how they get these wild looking characters. I love it. Oh yeah, no, that's My Good Days. I don't know what that first one was. Oh yeah, no, that's the idea. So it's like today and then I also did this, but then this thing happened, and then like thankfully. And so sometimes kids will keep a narrative, like my computer wouldn't turn on and I wanted to play Roblox, and then like thankfully it came back on, so it's so simple and cute. And then sometimes they tell this story like, you know, someone was trying to wake me up in the morning and they yelled at me and I couldn't get up. But then, you know, what is that? Then I went to school, and then in my garage, I don't know, they saw something cool in the garage. And then thankfully, I'm thankful for the planet. It's like, that's awesome. That's so great. I think making these kinds of comics just makes you feel good. You feel you're in a good mood after. I am for sure when I look at this kind of stuff. But it can also, I've worked with kids like where we talk about like a fight they had with their, or something they hate about their sibling, like a fight they had or how their sibling like bullies them. And then I'm like, okay, let's think of a different ending where you didn't hate your sibling at the end. It doesn't have to be like hugging, but then like what could have like made you feel a bit better? And sometimes it's like they get the upper hand, or, you know, they kind of win in a very subtle way, and then they feel kind of good about it. And I'm really into the idea of changing the story in your head. If you're gonna mull over it, you might as well just like write a different ending to some extent. Oh yeah, and so what we're gonna do, we're gonna do an exercise where, I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with Linda Barry's work. She's my total hero. She's a comic artist. She had a weekly comic a million years ago called Ernie Pook's Comique. Yeah. Her drawings are super weird. She's not a technical, perfect artist. She's really messy. She works on lined paper. She works with, I think, just like regular supplies. And she works a lot with kids. And so she does these exercises. She's doing a residence, or I think she's actually she works at the full-time in the University of Wisconsin. And she does these drawing classes with different departments. And I know that she works with like the people in nursing and, you know, doctors. And they do these drawing activities that are hilarious, like draw Batman from your memory, and it's super vulnerable because these people do not draw, they don't know how to draw, or they say they don't know how to draw and they're really uncomfortable and don't know how to start, but the drawings they make are so fun and awesome, and she's really into it, and it's really great to watch. And so she published a book called Syllabus about the work that she did. And some of the, I think when I started doing a daily comic, it was from this book, yeah. She would give her students homework where they, so they're working in, so even I can't, what am I doing? I'm just gonna show everyone here. It's all on like lined composition book paper. And she would ask the students to divide the paper in, you know, usually 4, and put little headings like today, like saw, did, went, ate, or whatever. Things that you can write down observations from or details. So I'd like to do this with kids where they take some observations from their day and draw them. And you can also do this writing. Like sometimes Linda Barry also does them and publishes them a lot online and shows them on Instagram. And sometimes it's just a really messy list with some doodles or like watercolors splashed on it or marker around it. It doesn't have to be that you're drawing the list out. But these details from a day, when you have a chunk of them, it's really fun and awesome to go back and look at them and remember a day that way. And also just to look at your day as a whole, like, oh yeah, this thing was crappy or this thing was crappy, but, you know, I did eat a giant bowl of whatever, popcorn. So yeah, this is kind of what I was trying to show there. So she sometimes divides it in a column and just like writes, and sometimes she will draw. I think from what I can tell, she probably note takes in kind of images. So we're gonna do that actually for the first part of the exercise. It won't take long. I have a bunch of paper here, pencils. We're gonna divide the paper in 4 and do some doodles. If you're really not comfortable drawing, you can make a list of things. You can choose your categories. I heard, if you're comfortable doing it from today, I know it's still kind of early, but there's lots we've done already today. You can put, I dreamed, I thought about, I phoned, I texted, like anything. Anything that we can make an observation about. And you can divide that in any kind of 4s. You can, obviously there's no rules. You can put them in columns. You can do it in rectangles. I'm gonna say,
And feel free to come join around the table for those that are just in the chairs if you'd like, or of course, just welcome to kind of observe if you'd prefer to do that. I'm gonna come bring some pencils and paper around to everyone.
I have put a few of Linda Berry's books around. If you want to have a look through them just to see what a page, like what a list can look like, it can just be words, it can be some images. I have some examples on the board. I kept these for years. These are some old ones. Sometimes I collaborate with my kids and do them too. Sometimes I did them in 15 minutes and sometimes I spent more time. But as you can see, sometimes it's just really a list. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Like this? There's another big Linda Berry book, if anyone wants to look. There's really nice examples in there, if you're not someone who's used to drawing, of how to just scribble something down and make a passable image.
that's looking great.
If you're stuck, an easy one to take up room is I said, because then you can do the bubbles and they take up a lot of room. You can also just write. You don't have to draw all the elements. You can also draw one big element. wonder if when people are done, if they feel comfortable, if we like walk around and look at them.
Yeah, we could do that.
Or maybe like if we're gonna take a
Yeah, we could do that maybe when we come.
break, we could leave them out if we want, and then people can have a look. Would love to see. So this activity can take kind of a long time. In my head, it would be short. I don't know why. But I have another one that's probably faster. We can do, or we can leave it at this. I'm comfortable either way. I don't know how we are.
Why don't we go through the second one, and then we can move into the break and people can continue working, or,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. The second one's one I do, yeah, it's actually much quicker. See some pretty great comics. I could have also done this before, but I put up a really easy this is one I did with the kids, so I kept it PG-13. Yeah, I dreamed that I had my wallet was super full of money, and then I felt all excited, and I Googled it. It's not great, I think. It doesn't mean you're gonna get a bunch of money. Oh yeah, so I should have put this but earlier, is super fast drawing class. For people who aren't comfortable drawing, I know that a friend of mine is joining online who is nervous about drawing because she doesn't draw, but I think Ivan Brunetti is a really great reference I often use, and Linda Berry, for how to draw a body really, really fast and without experience, and just using basic blobs and shapes and lines. And make it look really cool. Like, I think these look great. Yeah. A little late now for that activity, but the next one, for next time. So the second activity I have is, so we start with a big circle, going along with the idea that things are easy to draw if you think in terms of geometric shapes. It's really simple, squares, rectangles. I do this with kids a lot because they can get really stuck if they're intimidated, and us too. So what I usually do is, like, we start with a circle, and usually with the activity I'll ask people to draw like their breakfast or a meal they had, or but there's also, you could draw a cup, you could draw a mug. Basically, being when to represent a moment where you were kind of quiet and having a moment to yourself and reflecting, usually at the beginning of the day. So that might have been sitting down with a tea, brushing your teeth. I don't know. Brushing your teeth could get hard to draw, like the hand. But if you are game and want to draw the breakfast or a meal, or any meal you've had that you remember particularly well, you can start by just drawing a circle on, obviously on your paper. Okay, so for this activity, usually I just give a few points. These ones I just made them up because the idea, I change them every time. The idea basically is just to have you telling a story about some details. and including like exterior observations with interior observations. So it can be really nice to make an image that's like, I sat down and had, you know, my usual raisin bran and my cup of tea, and I was at my brother's house, and then, you know, this was actually one I made when I was doing a residency in Toronto. And then, you know, I just talked a bit about my brother. And then in the end, I just said, you know, I miss living close to my brother. So it just made a nice glimpse into an emotional state by just starting out with something simple like eating a breakfast, and not deep diving and not making many panels, just a single panel. So you could draw your breakfast, and this is so easy because food is just blobs. Food is just blobs and shapes. You can use as many sentences as you want to describe it, but I like to start out by describing the food that's on the plate. Or maybe you draw your favorite meal. Some people don't eat breakfast. If you prefer to draw the cup of tea or coffee, especially for those online who are joining, I'm thinking of Heather specifically, you can draw like a rectangle with a handle. That's your coffee. All right, I had speech jam. And this is where you can get really doodly and put all kinds of, if you flip through those books that I have out, those Linda Berry books are just full of texture and scribbling, and things look far from perfect, and it's kind of got this nice immediacy to it. Oh, we had the same breakfast. Oh, my other favorite. Sometimes too, the pleasure in like making a comic like this is putting all the little details around and little secrets and whatever insights. Are you going to share your comic, Robin? Keep it drawn. So then I always, you know, another prompt could be like around the planer cup somewhere. You write something about the morning, fact, a detail. You know, I'm wearing my favorite socks. I slept in too late. I had a dream about, or whatever. The idea being that this is like the morning, the very beginning of the day. Maybe if it fits, you can take one of your observations from the day and add it in if it works with the drawing. Other things we can include on the page if you want to enrich it or add more, something you're looking forward to today, something you're daydreaming about, something nagging on your mind, a call you have to make, anything like that. No laughing in class. A hard time. Do you want me to put up the fastest drawing class ever? Just a blob with arms and legs. These guys are, I love these kinds of drawings. So cute. I love this little guy with the buzz cut. So cute. It's so well done. And I think he has a beard. Amazing. Yeah, so I think I'm going to leave it at that for that activity, and you can wrap up the drawings, or we can take a break and we can work on it during the break.
Yeah, maybe we will move into our break. You're welcome to keep sitting and finish up your comics and your drawings. There's also coffee and tea just at the back by the windows there, and some snacks, so please feel free to help yourself to that. Take a bathroom break, whatever you need to do in the next 10 minutes or so. And then we'll come back together and we'll get into the discussion portion of the plan. So feel free to stay or mull around, whatever you need.
I love that you did that.
What did you do? Oh, I know. I love that. I haven't seen it yet.
But it's important.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's a historical document, really.
It's better than like the photo album. It is the
It is. It's like a time capsule.
Okay, maybe if everyone's ready, we can make our way back to the table and kind of get into the discussion portion in a couple minutes here.
Yeah, so Bonnie and I work very.
That's right, yeah. And Sid, I think, might have been there too, right?
Okay, you know, the duo.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
he did, they both did, or Sid did the psychodynamic program there.
Yeah.
And Bonnie did the CFT.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it was just like a big resource also because it had a sliding scale, there were successful people who didn't bother to go.
Nowhere, but
Yeah,
that gap.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Like a catastrophe in multiple ways. Like in terms of access, in terms of training, in terms of a space for therapists, in terms of, yeah. And like at the same time as the McGill program was just like kind of exploding and what's his name was getting into some police trouble and like there was that whole thing where the guy who was like training people
At
was
McGill,
also,
you mean?
yeah, like some ridiculous thing, like crazy thing.
yes, bad news bear, that one.
Yeah.
That one has
But the-
just unfolded until this past year. It's
Yeah.
the biggest train wreck in
Yeah.
out there. People.
Yeah, so what's like what is there in English? Like nothing, not a lot left. Like
National Therapy Center, there's
Right.
a few equivalents.
Right.
Actually just tried to get in contact with them and they don't have anyone available.
No, they are
To
getting
see-
500
requests a month.
Wow.
yeah.
I mean, they said that they would have Zoom, but I don't really want to.
Yeah.
But I know beggars can't be choosers, but.
I think it's
They're
a
getting a
different-
wave of new therapists right now as our graduates are getting signed up, so there might be more space these days. Yeah, it's hard, and it's very hard to find people in person because so many folks.
And something weird is happening with the certification where like for a while everybody was going broke and it was okay.
Okay, so I hope everyone had time to finish up their comic and get some refreshments and have a bit of a break. We're going to move into the discussion portion now. I just wanted to remind everyone again that if there are some kind of deeper mental health things that come up, feel free to step out of the room if you need to, and just be respectful of everyone who decides to share. I would like to kind of start by asking our other guests a couple questions before we kind of open up the floor to the bigger group. So I want to start by asking Heather, who's our arts therapist. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about your perspective as an arts therapist and what you think the potentials of making comics like we did today might offer people who are struggling with or trying to maintain their mental health. And I think the microphone is just right there for you.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think there's so much potential for the ways that comics can be helpful, and it's so individual. So I guess the first place I'd start is just to think about for each of you what that would mean before I start to give ideas of what it might mean for other people or some of the things you might consider, because the most important thing is how it can be important for you. In art therapy, one of the things that we really think about at the core of our profession is just the idea that there's so much that we can't express through words alone. Words are linear, they bind us in so many ways, and the minute we work in images, it can expand our perspectives, it can help us be able to put things that are happening simultaneously together rather than having to separate ideas. It just gives so much more room for complexity and depth, and sometimes also helps us to see things we might not otherwise be aware of. So the potential there is so broad. There's lots of ways that comics are actually used in art therapy. It really depends on the theoretical model. One of the ones I thought I'd just mention, because it might relate to some of the things people were working with here, is one of the first things when we make art is we externalize. So we're getting whatever the story is outside of ourselves so that we can see it from a distance. And as soon as we get that distance, it gives us a different perspective and it puts us in a different kind of relationship. And so much so often people, when you're suffering somehow, you can really identify with the suffering, like feel like it's me, I am sad, that is me. And as soon as we can get it outside, then I am somebody looking at maybe the sadness, and that gives us space between us. And the minute we create these spaces, it gives so much more potential. So, we're seeing lots of examples of that in your work, Sandra. And I was also thinking about the mapping that you were doing. And some people, I think in maps, and then when you try and speak in a map, it just sounds like verbal salad. It's so confusing to try and follow what somebody's saying when they speak in that way. But then when you put it out there, we can see it and we can follow it and we can engage with it in our own pace. So it just gives a different way of being able to connect with people's ideas. I think you also talked about this, Sandra, when you were speaking about, because with comics we can play with time, it also gives us the opportunity, we can look back or we can look into the future, we can have different options of what was happening then. Many things are happening at the same time. We can look at it from different angles. We can imagine potential futures. And that's something that I think that we sometimes don't spend enough time doing. When we look at if you were to look at what's on your TV list, there's so many things that give us doom-based futures. And we can play with what would be positive futures and more than one. And then how can we consider ones that might actually be possible? And how can we consider the steps to get there and how long it could take and different paths along the way? And as we do that, it just opens up so many opportunities.
Thank you, that's so great. And this actually leads me quite nicely into the question I have for Ariella. I was wondering if you could speak a bit from your perspective as someone that works in comic studies and that studies comics, just thinking about if there's anything you can tell us about how you've seen comics work to represent more difficult subject matter. For instance, are there any certain patterns or techniques that you tend to see in your work on representations of pain that might also lead themselves to representing mental health experiences? And how you think folks might look to comics either through creating or reading as a way of kind of processing that pain and trauma. So I guess kind of similar question that I had for Heather, but just speaking from your experience as a scholar working in the area.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about pain in comics is that the first thing that people think about is the humorous representation of pain and the way in which it can kind of hyperbolically give you something to laugh at that's even really extreme, like the Roadrunner thing, or if you look at newspaper comics, from the beginning of the century, or even if you look at something like Beavis and Butthead today, like animation, a lot of it has to do with representing pain as something which is funny and something which is, and there's various ideas that people might find pain funny. There are various reasons people might find pain funny. Like there's Bergson's idea that it kind of reminds us of the automatism of human behavior and the limits to our ability. And there was a lot of anxiety about the depiction of pain in comics, first of all, because there was anxiety that it would inure people to pain to laugh at it. And also later, there was anxiety that aestheticizing pain, the way that depictions of violence in superhero comics aestheticize pain, also did something that was kind of bad for people psychologically, especially bad for children psychologically. So it's interesting to have this genre that starts off with funny pain and moves on to aestheticize pain, and then turns into a whole subfield of people working with pain in ways that emphasize empathy and in ways that emphasize the capacity of word and image to bridge the limitations of word and image. So you were saying words, have these restrictions. Truthfully, images have these restrictions too. I mean, the thing about pain is that it seems to resist the idea of having a container. And so when you're working with these various modalities together, then you get something that is a little bit different. So there's a lot of different affordances that people use. And then I noticed a bunch of them in Sandra's work, like that thing where you externalize pain and you literalize it. That's a very common way to talk about pain because it takes something which is abstract and gives it a shape. Nietzsche says my pain is my dog and it follows me around all the time. And that's a little bit like that beast that you made. That is a familiar idea and a really useful idea. Sort of for the reasons that Heather was saying, because you sort of tame it, you externalize it, you distance it, you tame it, you make a friend of it, you do all kinds of different things with it. there's all this symbolia for depicting pain. So there's all those like jagged lines or the representation of pain language, which isn't really exactly language because it's not representational. So, ouch and ow, and then like jagged lettering or making things really big or using color or having things that break a frame. In Sandra's work, I was noticing that comic about her dad does a bunch of these things in really interesting ways. Like she starts with this physical evidence of harm, which is a bit of an indirect evidence of harm, like the red circles on the knuckles. And it turns into this internal thing, which you can't represent externally. And then that thing becomes so big that it's the whole panel. And then you turn it into something beautiful. So it's really this process of having this outer harm turn into this inner pain, turn into this thing which just overwhelms the image and the relationship. And then it's something that's like retrojected. So it's not just that it's beautiful, it's that it's behind them, like physically behind them. And there's definitely some wish fulfillment in that too, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
but
probably.
That's a good function.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Ariella. I guess, I don't know, Sandra, if you wanted to respond to either of them or if you have any thoughts that have come out of the workshop today.
I don't have anything to add.
That's fine. I don't know if your mic is on.
I am on,
No,
yeah.
that's totally fine. We can open it up, I guess, to the larger group at this point then. I don't know if anyone wants to share what they've worked on, the comic that they made today, if there's anything that's come to the surface through making the comic, or if you have anything about working with comics as part of like your mental health practice that you'd like to talk about, any questions, we can kind of open it up at this point. I will just remind people that we need the microphone so folks on Zoom can hear, so we'll have to just pass it around. But yes, Julie, please jump in.
I just wanted to comment on the comic of Sandra's that we were just speaking of. As a viewer of it, and participating in that feeling with you, like even, I feel a little verklempt right now just talking about it, but I think it allows the viewers their own avenue to process a similar grief, even if it's not the exact same grief that you are processing there. I think it touches on something in me with my own relationship to a parent that I can't access anymore, or, so. I think that as comics makers, it's a really great avenue for our own mental health, but I think, not that we make them specifically for other people, but there's this nice kind of beneficial side effect to it, I think.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about it today, how I also have a painting practice, and painting is so slow and so like laborious, and spend forever on one piece that has to depict whatever you're trying to communicate in this one image. And I was trying to imagine any of these comics that I've done in a painting, like what would that be? And I think the thing about comics is like there's always that next step. So it's like you're getting past things, and there's like the eventual end where either the page turns or the comic ends, and you've gone through like a little journey. Whereas when you're looking at a painting or making a painting, it's like this one image or an illustration or whatever is kind of static. So I think, I like the idea of bringing someone on a journey, or just like telling myself the story, like what's happening? Like this was such a crazy story, and it was so such a huge thing in my life that I felt like I had to do something, And so I feel like with comics, it's kind of maybe like making a movie, where you're like, okay, I want to tell this story, and I want to like reach the end and figure out what I'm thinking about this. So maybe I don't even know. Whereas other art that I work on feels so, all the work is in putting that one image. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important comment that you made too, Julie, about how you don't necessarily make comics for other people, but other people can look to them and kind of see their own experiences reflected in them. Like something that I really connected with during the pandemic was Sandra's comics, and like specifically the Beast comics, and kind of making like your anxiety visible, and for, you know, maybe not necessarily the first time, but one of the first times where I'm like, yes, this is exactly what it feels like to be in that headspace and feel this like anxiety bogging down on you. You kind of create these connections with people that you didn't necessarily seek out to make, but that end up happening. And I think that's really interesting when we kind of get into a group like this where we're creating alongside each other or connecting on social media as well. So that was a really great point. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm wondering if anyone wants to share the comic that they created and talk a little bit about what it is that they were working on today.
I will.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to choose to, my name's Alan, hi. I'm going to use the second exercise. And just as a quick background, I write kids' books, I cartoon, I'm friends with these people. I am in a place in my creative life where I'm feeling very stuck and bored with myself. So that's, doing this helped me get in touch with just letting go and just kind of not feeling like I have to stay within the lines, which is something that I, in a professional way, if I illustrate a book, I have to be professional, you know, my back has to be straight. And there was something very freeing about just starting off with, for me, it was my morning iced espresso, and just, because that is my ritual, and that allowed me to kind of just say F it, you know, about, because it's like, I want to be perfect. I want to do what she says to do. And it's, I let go of that and just like wrote down thoughts and got stuff out of me. And it's, I don't know, I look at it and I kind of go, I really like it. I really like, you know, if I didn't shave, what if I go to the workshop? You know, I don't know, I really appreciated that kind of an exercise.
Oh, I'm so glad. I love your drawing.
Emotionally, I don't know, I always find like I doodle all the time, and like my doodles in a daily kind of journal way aren't cartoon panels, but they're just ughs and blooks, and I find on a daily basis, or whenever I get to it, like just putting something in front of me on paper helps externalize. It doesn't often change my mood, but it does externalize the ugh and the blah. And days later, if I thumb back and go, oh, why did I say that? That's also healthy for me. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. It just reminds me, I also drew my morning coffee. And I specifically drew like the drips coming off my coffee cup and the spilled coffee around it, because like no matter what, I spill every single time I'm pouring a cup of coffee. And it's just funny how like little things like that kind of bring out things you didn't really expect. I'm like, oh, this is kind of just like a representation of how I feel of myself as kind of like a chaotic person sometimes with this spilled coffee everywhere. So yeah, I also really appreciated just these kind of mundane or drawings of what seem to be mundane things and how they can kind of bring up other feelings. So thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, Heather.
Thank you. So I was thinking, well, I don't know which way to, there we go. I drew my morning yogurt and coffee. And as I was doing this, I was thinking just how the prompts sort of let you be a little bit more compassionate and how you draw things. And that just really helped me get into a different state of mind. And I was also thinking how much connection was coming through in the ways you were talking about all of the processes here, both in the connecting and the making and in the sharing, how it resonates. And I had this really interesting connection experience as I was thinking about mourning and thinking how hard I was working to try and organize what I was going to do. And I started hearing my parents' voice when I was little, when we'd have the time of quiet, and they'd be like, we're organizing our thoughts right now, as they were drinking their coffee, and we had to be quiet while they organized their thoughts. I'm like, oh, I'm organizing my thoughts. So that was neat. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, Ariella, please.
It was, I'm not going to share my picture, it's really bad. But I was thinking about all the COVID drawings and the COVID projects and the function of an exercise like this one and how people did this kind of thing during the pandemic, because time worked differently during the pandemic. And so people were a little bit outside of some of the constraints of productive time and normative time. They weren't rushing out of their house to get to work, and they didn't have these markers of progress that were occupying them very, very fully. And so in some cases, not in the case of healthcare workers and not in the case of essential workers who had these accelerated, insane schedules, but for many, many, many people, time started to be something that they filled differently and felt differently, and that operated seasonally rather than in a kind of a more linear fashion or like work-driven fashion. And Julie and Margaret Cameron and also Linda Barry talk about, in Cameron's case, morning pages, and in Barry's case, these drawings, as a form of meditation for people who are not used to just sitting still.
Yeah.
And I think that because there was the need to structure one's own time, because one's own time was not already filled by these external demands in the way that they normally are. And because it was such a useful tool, all these people started doing the same things, like daily drawings or daily comics or daily morning pages or daily yoga classes. In some cases, there was a lot of overlap. And a lot of overlap also in the kinds of noticing and the kinds of experiences they were having. So I look at your book and I'm like, oh, I did yoga with Adrian and I made bread and I watched Tiger King. So, but, in this isolated experience, there was an unusual, I think, amount of commonality, again, in certain categories. Then there were very extreme ways that people went through this. That were dramatic and so particular. If you were ill, if your loved one was ill, if you were in the hospital, if you were making food for other people, that was different. But for many, many people, there was something the same. And there was an interesting thing that happened to some of my students where they really thrived. And it was very surprising to me because I expected it to be a time of terrible crisis. And for many people, it was. But even sometimes also actually for young kids, they really thrived because their parents were not hustling them out the door. And that very stressful conflict in their life was gone. And they did better. And so I had some young people I knew who just did really, really well with making their time something that was meaningful for them. And this kind of cataclysmic, like mental health impact, in some cases it happened, but in some cases for some people, certain things led up and that's changed again. So I was just curious about whether anybody had any thoughts about that.
I actually can, hi, my name is Laura. I can add to that by my breakfast drawing this morning, which is avocado toast with scrambled eggs and blueberries and of course coffee. But this is more of like my imagination of what I really wish I had it's actually what I cook for breakfast, but I only had like 5 minutes to eat it because I had to rush my son to get ready for school and then feed the dog. And then, so this was really enjoyable for maybe 2 seconds. And it was actually therapeutic to actually draw it on paper and be like, oh yeah, this was a really good breakfast, I remember. But I think that's a really good point that you brought up, that like taking the time to draw or taking the time to relax instead of hustle all the time is really important, especially in our everyday lives. So yeah.
Yeah, I think too what you were saying, Ariella, about like some people really thrive during that time. It kind of reminds me of Sandra's part in her presentation where she talks about like two things being true at once, and how I think sometimes people are shying away from talking about like during COVID, like if they did really great, and they know that so many people did really poorly during that time. And kind of interesting to think about how both those things can exist at once. And for some people, it was really this time where they could reflect and do things that they wouldn't usually be able to do if they were hustling and going to work and whatever else. But at the same time, it's still true that other people really were suffering. So I think you bring up a really good point there. And yeah, it's just very interesting point.
And also maybe in terms of your research and your daily comics over COVID, there was this restriction on gathering and on certain kinds of community, and then there were creations of other kinds of community. And some of those communities happened online, and some of those communities happened online and outside, which is funny because online and outside to me are opposites, almost. I don't know if they really are opposites, but they feel a little bit like opposites. And there is absolutely a freedom to being able to gather again like this face-to-face that feels really important. But there was also something very interesting about the intimate publicity of the online world during COVID, where people were showing things inside their houses and inside their hearts in ways that were unusual for some of them and new for some of them. Like there were a whole lot of like celebrity interiors at the beginning. I don't know if you guys remember that, being like, oh, that's Taylor Swift's cat bed or whatever it is. I mean, I can't remember if that was it particularly, but because people were stuck inside away from others, you saw their insides, both their domestic interiors and sometimes, their insides as they depicted them in drawing or in writing in ways that they wouldn't have shared if they had access to their ordinary structures of connection.
Yeah.
So that I also found really interesting.
Yeah, that it makes me think of, I'm blanking on the name of the scholar now, but there's a social media studies scholar that talks about the idea of being together alone in terms of like social media communities. And I think that really was reflected in like these COVID comics that Sandra and Julie were creating, and how that kind of led to connections and greater friendships outside of the online communities. I don't know if either of you want to speak a bit about how that relationship developed a bit more, or, I mean, don't feel put on the spot by any means, but.
I was curious, actually, I was going to ask you, Julie, if before we were putting our diary online, if you were sharing things like that before. Vulnerable
Honestly,
posts.
not to that degree of regularity, and I don't actually really recall, but I remember like I saw maybe one or two of your panels like the first couple of days, but as soon as I saw your first Staying In comic, I was like, okay, I had to write you and say, do you mind if I hop on board, because this is how I'm going to survive this craziness that's happening. I knew right away that what you were doing is what I needed in my life, and we had met a few times in person prior to that. And I feel like had this crazy connection.
Yeah, we already loved each other.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like I knew you for 100 years already.
Yeah.
So instantly just knowing that we had this thing that we were working on in our own spaces, but we're kind of cheering each other on. And also for me, as a side note, committing to something like this, I thought, okay, for sure, the first 100 days. And then, you kind of inadvertently become a content creator. And then there's this worry about, oh my God, we're in the house. There's nothing interesting going on. What am I going to do for 100 days? But I'm here to tell you that mundane is hilarious. Like, you don't need to make stuff up. Just write what's going on, even if it's the same old, same old. There's always a different spin somewhere. And even like with what I did today, it almost becomes like a stream of consciousness when I'm writing stuff down and thinking, oh, this would be funny, and letting it go. And like Trump ended up at the bottom of my page here, talking about the pizza's gonna be huge, But this is the kind of thing where you just kind of let your brain go, and you don't worry about how perfect the drawing is, because it's getting the information, getting the feeling out. That's, for me, that's important, and seeing how that translates. And I think that as soon as I saw Sandra's comic, I knew that this was going to be a really good tool for me to kind of add some structure to my life, but also comment on how wild and hilarious and tragic this thing was that we were going through together.
Yeah. And it was fun to like check each other's in the morning, like, did Julie post her comic yet? Like, see what you did the day before, and then I kind of knew your neighbors through your posts.
Yeah.
And it was a cool way to get to know somebody, but, like by literally reading what you did every day.
And some of the things that I thought were hilarious too, I can't think of specific examples, but you would post something, I'd be like, oh my God, that exact same thing happened to me.
Yeah, we would like cook the same thing or do the same thing or watch the same movie.
Or some child is having some sort of meltdown.
Yeah.
Or, you know.
Meltdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun to connect that way. And when people that we didn't really know would post for a couple days or jump in for a week and post, it was so fun to like welcome a new member and read theirs. It reminded me of the days of vlogging when you'd wake up and you'd be like, what do I have in my, whatever it was called, like RSV? What was that thing? RSS feed? I don't even know where we would go to get it, but you'd have all this like stuff in your inbox and it'd be so exciting. So it did feel like that too. I had something to look forward to look at.
It's interesting too that now these narratives of your experiences just exist online, kind of like permanently, and are recycled and come back up. Like I know for myself, I wasn't making comics during the pandemic, but just like the wildest things that me and my roommate were doing to pass the time, I'll get the like Instagram notifications, the memories. I'm like, oh my God, like it's even funnier now looking back than it was at the time. And it's interesting that kind of like play on time that Ariella was talking about and how comics can do that in the moment, but then also when you reflect back, you're kind of taken back to that moment of these crazy times we all lived through.
Yeah.
Does anyone else want to jump in and share? Oh yes, please.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the prompts around like I saw, I overheard and stuff, because I think it's just such a good way to like get people like tweezing out those thoughts. Because if you ask a direct question about like, how was your day today? Yeah. It's like, what do you want to know? Yeah, like good, yours? You know what I mean? And it made me think about this workshop I did with young people. So it was part of a research project. And at the end, we were doing this big kind of event, showcase event with a load of stakeholders. And I wanted to get them thinking about what they wanted stakeholders to get out of the event. So I did this like exercise where I got them to think about what they want stakeholders to hear, what they want them to know, how they want them to feel, and what they want them to do afterwards. And we like laid it out bit by bit, and we did this whole storyboard. And from that, we were able to identify kind of like the aims and the kind of like vibe of the event. And like, had I just asked like, what do you want to tell stakeholders? They would have been like, that we had a nice time. You know what I mean? Specific. So it's really like, really helpful, like those prompts and stuff. And I did a comic. I love how you made it fun. Yeah, it's like, so I make zines in research. So it's like a mini zine, I guess. I always find them like a nice little flip books. And I did like a little recounter of what happened this morning on my way here. But I'll pass it around and you can have a look. But it really made me like get into like, okay, what happened today and how do I feel about that? So yeah, I really enjoyed the workshop.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. I think that it's such a special thing to be able to do too. Like you get in the habit of starting to appreciate little funny things around and like characters. I can't even, every single person I see in my neighborhood, I just like love something weird about them and I want to draw it and I want to ask them about it. And I think it really opens your eyes to all these hidden gems that you can write a story about. You know?
Yeah. I think we talked a little bit too about how just observing people in your neighborhood and drawing them kind of created more relationships and connections with those people too. Like, which is super interesting that creating comics is kind of this way to connect with people.
Yeah, when I tell people, I often talk to people and say like, oh, can I take a picture of you? Can I draw you? Or can I paint you? Because sometimes I'll use reference photos for painting. But my husband was laughing at me because this man that had lived 3 or 4 doors down forever, had never talked to any of us, but I had had a million conversations with him since talking to him about comics. So I asked him if I could take a photo of him walking, because he has this really great walk. And then we were talking, he told me his name, and then he like told me he was going for this really invasive procedure at the hospital. He was super scared. And so we talked for ages, and then the next time I saw him, I was like, how did that thing go, Rick? And he was like, it wasn't as bad as I thought, thanks, Sandy. And Sylv was like, what's that? What the hell is that? But I think like something approaching someone like, can I draw you? Or can I take a picture of your dog is so unoffensive that maybe drawing you is different, but I've talked to a million people that way and gotten to know my neighbors, for better or worse.
Yeah.
Do you find when you meet people, you end up walking opposite directions, knowing dogs' names, but not their name?
Yeah, I do. I asked someone the other day, what's your name? Because I only know like Mary does name, a new neighbor friend. And so we introduced ourselves with our human names and shook hands.
You know, thinking about the mental health aspect of the workshop, if we all sort of made it a point, I'm not being inclusive, but you know, if I made it a point every day to go out and say, introduce myself to dog owners,
Right.
every day,
Yeah.
that would impact my mental health.
Totally.
And if I did it with a safe space of I want to draw your dog,
Yeah, totally.
like there's something very connective about
Yeah.
getting outside of yourself, and that's what drawing can do.
Yeah.
Even though it's an internal process.
Yeah, and it's like an invitation for a great story because everyone's going to tell you this like amazing, people are so funny, they're going to be like, oh my God, he's the best. And like, oh, I've never seen a dog like this before. And they're going to like get really crazy about it. And it just, you feel happy. It's a pick-me-up for sure.
I was just wondering, how do you find the courage to put yourself out there, put your work out, and get feedback or introduce yourself?
I'll let you answer too, Julie. For me, I was pretty nervous actually when we started doing that. Because there were some days where I was like, I'm definitely not putting that. And then I was like, well, then I'm doing that thing on Instagram where you just show like great things happening at home. So I know there were many things where I showed me like, say, yelling at my kids, which is something I'm not proud of, that I do rarely, but sometimes I do. Or just being rude. And that feels really hard to put out there, but it's always worse in your head. And I think they're always well received. But even like, say, I sent out a newsletter about this event, and I included a snippet of the comic of my dad. And you know, he subscribes to my newsletter and usually like writes me an email after. And I was like, oh man, he's going to recognize. Of course, he's going to recognize that piece. So I had like a moment of terror, but I don't know. Sent it, and I guess you just like press publish. And then what I would do sometimes is I'd like send something and then I just close everything and like go let it off. Like that didn't happen.
Do that with like risky text. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Forget the phone at home. How did it work for you, Julie, like putting all that out there?
I think, I mean, I'm kind of a talker anyways, so and I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve anyway, so it's not that big of an ask for me to put most stuff out there, but it gets complicated with the other people in my life, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And actually, even just recently, I found that I went to my comic making practice to process some of my own complicated feelings about something that happened in my family that I knew I couldn't publish.
Yeah.
Just because I'm not in it to make other people feel bad, and also me writing it down and having it saved on my iPad was enough for me to process the feelings. So it was still the act of making it, but you don't have to share everything, right?
Yep, totally.
Yeah, and in that note as well, I went through some really intense health stuff, and I knew immediately when I got this shocking, horrific news that I had breast cancer. One of the first things in my brain was like, not just that I'm going to make a comic, it was like, how could I monetize this? Which of course I haven't, but I'm a little embarrassed to say that. But so that is something actually that I have done. I recorded all of the new things that I went through the process and the treatment, I kept it on note cards, and then after about a year, I started writing a script, and I have been making a comic, but it hasn't really seen the light of day, and that's not something that I have really shared publicly yet, and I don't know if I will, but the act of making it and processing the feelings, and also I interviewed my grandmother before she passed away about her experience in the 80s with breast cancer, so I really got to know a lot about her experience, and yeah, so at the end of the day, if it never sees light of day, if nobody else ever reads it, like, it's really enriched my life, just the act of doing it. So. And this month I'm 5 years cancer-free.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think that's really important too to note that, like, it doesn't always have to be like put out into the world, right? There is a catharsis in just going through that process for yourself. Does anyone else want to share or have any thoughts? Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about the courage, and then I was thinking back to what you both were talking about, because it was bringing me to thinking about love and all the different ways that love shows up. And so, like, what an act of love with your neighbors and the dogs in the neighborhood, and what an act it can be when we reach out in those ways. And I was remembering when I got my first Linda Berry book, and after I read it, I'm like, this is just a series of love stories, like, you know, all of the messy humanity and beyond humanity, and just being able to find the love there, and how healing that can be. And I think when I think back to especially the comics that are on themes around mental health and suffering, there's so much love in the ways those often get conveyed, and just like that connection of like, like, I feel for them, but it also touches places in me, all the connections that happen there. I really appreciate that, and how much that's been part of this conversation.
Yeah.
That just made me think about, you know, I know a few of us work with like middle school kids, and there's so many wonderful, like, even 10 years ago, maybe there's one or two graphic novels that were popular that had mental health issues, kind of they were more in the way back of the story. And now, like, there are so many popular bestsellers dealing with anxiety and eating disorders and sexuality questions. And I'm blown away by like how therapeutic the graphic form is, as not just for us sitting here talking about it, but just as a kind of tool for kids to see themselves these days, which, you know, I just thought I'd comment on that.
My name's Lacey, and I just wanted to say thank you. We're gonna pop out a little bit early. But yeah, I'm like a homeschooling mom and somebody who journals and Walden journals, and so I love these prompts on different ways to just touch on your day. And I was always like so moved by your comics throughout the pandemic, and I've always really admired them. And as somebody who doesn't, like, I'm not like a naturally good drawer, but we've been taking some online drawing classes, like on Skillshare or whatever, just trying to get a little bit better at it. But I love just the idea of breaking it down into really simple stuff and using lots of text, and just this little exercise. I love, because as I was like drawing a room, it made me realize like all those tiny little like judgments and anxiety thoughts that I have that would never like be necessarily big enough to make it into a journal, but then kind of just recognizing them, how they come out when you're sketching something. It's like, oh, it just provides like a shift in perspective that was really valuable. And so, yeah, thank you to everybody that organized this, and thanks for making it free and letting us come. And I hope to take some more workshops with you in the future.
Thanks so much for coming. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just touch on the previous comment just about having these narratives out there for kids to look at and learn about. And I think it's really important to have these books and these texts out there that kind of break down that stigma a little bit. And I think we're kind of moving towards a world that's a little bit less stigmatized in terms of mental health, but having the narratives out there and having people reading them and sharing them, I think, is really important towards working towards that.
Way, like the graphic. The graphic form is the same way to present some of these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's something that kind of goes back to that like humor perspective where you can share that experience that might be a little dark or a little deep, but having that kind of hint of being like, oh, but it's also kind of funny, that makes it a bit more palatable to broader audiences, I think. So we have the space till 3. I realize that's another additional hour here, so we definitely don't need to fill that time, but I think we're coming to the point in the discussion where we're kind of starting to wrap up. So I just want to ask if there's any final thoughts or anything else that anyone wants to share before we kind of close things off for the day. Yes, Julie.
I just want to say that I'm really delighted that there is a world where this is a PhD topic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I was saying to some folks earlier, it's when you talk to other people and being like, oh yeah, I'm studying comics for my PhD, you get a mixed reviews, but I really appreciate it. I think it's very important work, and I'm so thankful that everyone was here today to share in this workshop, share in the discussion. Thank you so much again to Sandra for leading your wonderful presentation and all the prompts. Thank you, Ariella, for being here and sharing your expertise. And thank you to Heather as well for sharing your perspective. Could not have put on the event without the 3 of you, so thank you again so much. And thank you to Fourth Space. You've been wonderful to work with, and the lead up to this and getting everything tech-wise sorted out. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. We do have the space, so feel free to chat and hang out. There's lots of coffee and snacks left, but thank you again so much for being here, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for coming in to the space, participating in this. Really appreciate it. And of course, everyone on Zoom for joining us there, and also on YouTube. We're going to be closing up the live stream and the Zoom now, but just a reminder that it remains available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit, share it, etc. And one more thing is have a fantastic weekend. Okay.